On a frosty November morning, Eli Turner stepped outside his log cabin only to find his beloved pickup gone, towed overnight without warning. The thin layer of white on the pine needle-littered ground crackled beneath his boots as he approached the empty gravel strip where his truck should have been. A dull, echoing absence greeted him. Only a rectangle of tire impressions and a folded notice taped to the mailbox post remained. He pulled the paper loose, hands rough from years of mountain work fumbling slightly on the adhesive. The words were printed in sterile type, vehicle in non-compliance with HOA aesthetic standards, tow executed 11:52 p.m. Below that, Cynthia Bellwood's tight signature sat like a sharp edge. Eli read it twice, then once more, slower. His jaw clenched. Across the narrow road, June McCarthy had just cracked open her screen door, drawn by the noise or perhaps the silence. She waved gently. "Coffee's on," she called, voice warm as ever. "You look like someone punched your dog." Eli managed a faint smile, folding the paper into his coat pocket. He crossed over, ducking under the low juniper branch that always tried to snag his hat. June's living room smelled of lemon oil and rising bread, but it was the oatmeal he noticed first, soft steam rising from bowls already set on the table, brown sugar shimmering in a glass dish. "They took the truck," he muttered. She poured the coffee before answering. "Last night. I heard the beeping. Thought it was the garbage crew coming early, but," she trailed off, sliding the sugar toward him. "They didn't warn me. No ticket. Just gone." June sipped, nodding. "Same thing happened to Alan's shed. Told him the paint was too reflective. HOA fined him, then had it removed. Claimed it was an eyesore." Eli stirred his oatmeal, gaze far off. "You think this is just about my truck?" "I think it's about control," she said, quiet but firm. Later that morning, he drove June's aging Buick down the winding road into the center of Pine Bluff. Frost still clung to shaded roofs, melting in gentle droplets that tapped like clocks against shingles. The diner's sign flickered, Diane's, just beneath the silhouette of a steaming cup. Inside, the bell above the door sang his arrival, and warm smells wrapped around him, maple syrup, bacon, cinnamon. "Morning, Eli," Diane called from behind the counter. Her hands were busy wiping a mug, but her eyes had clocked him the second he stepped in. He nodded, choosing the booth near the window where the sun hit the tabletop just right. The radio played Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade, scratchy and nostalgic, just as he liked it. By the time his coffee arrived, two other locals had wandered in, Tom from the bait shop, and Gloria who ran the small-town post office. They didn't ask questions. Just offered that peculiar brand of rural commiseration, shared silence, then a muttered, "Heard about the truck," and a shake of the head. "I don't remember voting for any of these new rules," Tom said eventually. Gloria leaned closer. "Cynthia called it a board decision. They changed the bylaws without town input." Eli didn't reply. He took a slow sip, eyes narrowing. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a rusted part of him, a part that hadn't been needed since he hung up the uniform, began to stir. That afternoon, he returned home and climbed into the attic, where old paperwork had gathered like dust. The HOA handbook from 15 years ago still smelled of mildew and printer ink. He flipped through it, noting margins Cynthia had redlined and replaced. New sections had been stapled in, others erased entirely. His fingers traced the clause numbers, silently comparing them to the citations on the notice. When dusk crept in and painted the treetops in copper, Eli stood by the window, gaze fixed on the empty driveway. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then stopped. A draft ran through the floorboards. "That was a mistake, Cynthia. He dials a number he hasn't used in years, Ray. I need a favor." 3 massive SUVs rolled into Pine Bluff like a slow-moving convoy, led by a woman who once commanded a real one. They weren't flashy. Matte green, with subtle dents and dull rims, the kind of vehicles that looked more comfortable in sandstorms than suburbia. Ray's idled slightly louder than the others, the idle coughing once like an old smoker clearing his throat. Eli stood near the porch, arms crossed, as the convoy pulled into his gravel drive in practiced precision. Lisa Monroe stepped out of the lead SUV, boots crunching on the frost-hardened dirt. She hadn't changed, still wore her dark hair tied back tight, movements crisp, eyes alert. Ray followed her out of the second vehicle, stretching his back with an exaggerated grunt. "I think my spine froze somewhere near Idaho," he muttered. Eli cracked a small grin. "And yet you still made good time." Lisa marched forward, inspecting the layout. "You weren't kidding about the place. Cozy. Strategic." June appeared on her porch across the way, arms folded into a shawl, eyes sparkling. "Now that's a convoy." Lisa gave a short wave. "You must be June. Eli mentioned you're cooking." June chuckled. "And you must be the reason our squirrels are now on high alert." From the third SUV spilled out 3 more figures, veterans from Eli's past, none introduced formally yet, but each nodding in silent recognition. They carried duffel bags, thermoses, and the kind of presents that said they didn't come for sightseeing. "You don't poke at veterans unless you want a lesson in strategy," June had once said. Her voice echoed now in Eli's mind, perfectly timed with the soft thud of boots and clipped banter. "I still say the worst op was the desert one," Ray started, elbowing Eli. "Remember when I left the maps in the other Humvee?" "You mean the one we watched drive away for 3 hours in the wrong direction?" Lisa shot back. "Semantics," Ray muttered. "We made it." Eli led them toward the edge of the property, where an HOA sign gleamed beneath the morning sun. It was new, white, with overly crisp lettering about noise, grass length, and unapproved vehicle presence. Lisa studied it. No mention of weight class. No mention of park duration unless overnight. No photographic enforcement clause. "Exactly," Eli said, opening a weathered manila folder. Inside, copies of the old and new HOA guidelines, some with handwritten notes in blue ink. "Compliance parking," Lisa said, voice low. "Strategic," Eli nodded. They circled the area, noting sight lines, blind corners, street widths. Ray squatted beside a storm drain, muttering about water flow and ice slicks. One of the other veterans whistled low, pointing out a cul-de-sac entrance that would make the perfect bottleneck. The plan began to form, innocuous at first glance. SUVs parked slightly askew but within allowed distances. No laws broken. Just, inconvenient enough to gum up the daily flow. And more importantly, no grounds for fines. Back at the cabin, June handed out peanut brittle wrapped in wax paper, muttering about how she hadn't made this much since the county bake sale of '89. The group accepted gratefully, lounging on the porch, laughter peppering the chilly air. Later that afternoon, with the lights softening and the shadows stretching, Eli mounted a small GoPro to the porch's overhang. The red light blinked to life, tracking the first of the SUVs as Lisa angled it along the curb, backing in with surgical precision. "It's inside the lines," she confirmed. Ray added, "and technically not overnight. We rotate before dusk." Eli nodded, watching the lens blink. "That camera catches everything." Beneath the pine trees, wind began to rattle the branches again. A chill moved through the air, not just of cold, but of something coiled, waiting. Lisa grins, "Let's see how Karen deals with a convoy." The HOA's precious silence was shattered, not by noise, but by the rumble of perfectly parked SUVs, and the internet. At dawn, the convoy was already in place. 5 SUVs lined the winding entrance of Pine Bluff like disciplined sentries. Tires square to the curb. Bumpers aligned with surgical precision. Each license plate perfectly visible. The morning light cut through the mist, catching droplets of dew glistening like stage lights on a performance. Marvin McCarthy stood across the road behind a small tripod, eyes squinting behind thick-rimmed glasses. June's grandson had inherited her determination but none of her filter. He wore a patched army field jacket, not for fashion, but because he claimed it made his neighbors underestimate him. He adjusted the camera, then hit record. Today in HOA hypocrisy, he began in a soft, amused tone. The lens slowly panned across the line of vehicles. "We bring you the curious case of Pine Bluff, Montana, where parking perfectly is apparently a threat. The footage cut to a shot from Eli's porch camera, where Ray leaned out of the SUV's window and gave a slow, sarcastic salute. Marvin's voice continued over the image. When compliance becomes resistance, sometimes all it takes is a full tank and a parking permit. From the kitchen window, June watched her grandson munch on leftover apple pie while clicking through editing timelines with rhythmic ease. "You're going to poke the bear, Marvin," she warned gently. "Bear's already growling, Grandma," he replied, smirking. Within hours of posting the video online, views began ticking up. 20,000. 25. Then the comments came. "This is gold." Finally, someone pokes back at these HOA tyrants. "I'd buy all 5 of those drivers a beer." Marvin barely had time to sip his coffee when the local Channel 9 reporter reposted the link with a line, "The most Montana protest you'll see this week." Across Pine Bluff, residents peeked from their curtains. Some chuckled softly. Others shook their heads in disbelief, but no one complained. Not even the McAllisters, who once phoned the HOA over a pink flamingo. Eli sat on the porch, papers spread across his table, next to the rulebook, now dog-eared and tabbed. Lisa paced, muttering dates and fine print aloud. Ray dozed under a blanket, unbothered by fame or frost. Cynthia Bellwood, however, did not sleep easy. The video had forced her hand. Her calls to the HOA attorney produced one clear answer: everything was within regulation. No violations. No recourse. Her jaw clenched at every frame of Marvin's smirking commentary. On the afternoon of the second day, a letter arrived. Typed in serif font, with embossed HOA header and an unnecessary 4-sentence preamble, it read: "Dear Mr. Turner, your recent behavior has generated unwanted attention. We request that you cease all dissemination of imagery that may cause disruption or misrepresent the community's values. No law cited. No fine imposed. Just a veiled threat wrapped in politeness." Eli read it twice, then once more aloud for good measure. Lisa snorted. "They're rattled." June tilted her head. "And a little desperate." Later that evening, Eli stood inside the front hall. He slid the letter into a cheap frame he'd found in the garage, straightened it on the wall with quiet precision. Just beneath it, he hung a small sign freshly laminated, words bold and cheerful: "Smile for HOA." Eli places the letter in a frame, hangs it by his front door, next to a camera labeled "Smile for HOA." A certified envelope arrived at Eli's door, inside, a threat dressed in legalese and arrogance. The paper was stiff, the font officious, and the seal of the Pine Bluff HOA embossed like a badge of war. Eli held it between his calloused fingers for a long while before opening it, the crackle of the envelope echoing in his otherwise quiet cabin. The fireplace hissed gently behind him, and the cold front that had rolled in overnight settled against the windows like a silent witness. He read the letter twice. Then a third time. Cynthia had signed it herself, in her sweeping, self-satisfied cursive, accusing Eli of orchestrating disruptive imagery and creating confusion among residents regarding regulatory compliance. It stopped short of outright threats, but the veiled language was unmistakable: cease immediately, or consequences may follow. Eli's lips twitched at the phrase, visual defamation. Lisa arrived not long after, snow dusting the shoulders of her field jacket. Ray followed with a thermos of cider. June was already seated by the fire, thumbing through a well-worn copy of the community bylaws, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. "They're rattled," Lisa said, scanning the letter. "But this is sloppy." Eli handed her a second sheet, his notes, scribbled in pencil. "This line," he said, tapping the paragraph about binding regulation, refers to a clause tied to the public charter. "But if they forgot to renew it?" June looked up, brow lifted. "Then all of this," she said, waving the letter, "is smoke." Ray settled into the armchair with a soft grunt. "You want me to check county records?" Marvin's voice came through the open cabin door before his body did. "Already done. Charter lapsed last May. No renewal filed." He grinned, holding up a flash drive like it was a trophy. "And I've got time-stamped screen grabs." the living room turned into a makeshift war room. Bylaws spread across the table, warm cider passed around, and a ticking wall clock marked time like a metronome of resistance. June, ever the quiet archivist, highlighted sections while Eli dictated. Lisa typed calmly, eyes sharp behind thin glasses. By dusk, a letter had taken shape, measured, polite, and devastating. Eli read it aloud once, his voice steady, shaped by decades of experience and restraint. To the residents of Pine Bluff. In light of recent communications from the HOA, I feel compelled to clarify several legal and procedural inconsistencies regarding the current standing of said association. Respectfully, your neighbor and veteran, Eli Turner. He printed copies on thick paper, each folded with care. Marvin prepared digital versions for emailing. Ray, between bites of beef jerky, addressed envelopes. The next morning, Eli walked through Pine Bluff with slow purpose, placing a letter in each mailbox by hand. It was Veterans Day. Flags fluttered. The scent of baking pies drifted from windows. At each porch, residents peeked out, some nodded, some raised hesitant hands, and a few simply watched with wide, silent eyes. Back at the HOA headquarters, a glass and brick cube pretending to be more than it was, Cynthia Bellwood sat behind her desk, sipping chamomile tea. The sunlight refracted coldly off her wedding ring as she read the copy someone had slipped under her door. By the time she reached the signature, the color had drained from her cheeks. She stood abruptly, sending her chair scraping backward. Her heels clicked sharply on the polished floor as she pushed open the front door. The wind whipped her blazer, and she stared out across the community she'd once ruled by printed memo and clipped tone. A man walked by with a copy of Eli's letter folded neatly in his back pocket. Another carried a lawn rake and didn't even look her way. "They'll regret this," she muttered, storming down the steps. Pine Bluff woke up to the smell of brisket and protest. June had fired up her grill, and the whole block showed up. Smoke drifted through the cold morning air, curling over rooftops like an invitation. The hiss of meat hitting cast iron mingled with laughter, and within an hour, June's backyard looked more like a county fair than a protest. Folding chairs lined up in uneven rows. Mismatched mugs steamed with hot cocoa and cider. A checkered tablecloth covered a long makeshift buffet, pulled pork piled high beside golden cornbread, jars of pickles, and a cooler stocked with sodas. Children darted between legs, handing out flyers stamped with a bold headline, "Your HOA. Your voice." And a QR code linking to Marvin's latest video. Eli arrived quietly, a knit cap pulled low over his ears, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket. He nodded to June, who stood by the grill wielding tongs like a general reviewing her troops. She grinned without looking at him. "Took you long enough," she said. "Brisket's almost gone." Eli chuckled, then helped set out an extra tray of buns. Around them, the crowd swelled. Diane from the diner showed up with a wagon full of warm pecan pies and little paper signs that read, "Compliments of Diane's, no HOA funding required." She kissed June's cheek, winked at Eli, and got to work slicing. Lisa mingled among the guests, her gaze scanning for signs of trouble. She pointed out the fine print on an HOA clause regarding unsanctioned gatherings exceeding 10 individuals, and Marvin, ever the opportunist, projected the rule onto a hung bedsheet flapping gently in the breeze. The text glowed under the weak sunlight, highlighted in red. "Seems we've got 9 people and one very active brisket," he joked, drawing laughs. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder in old unit jackets, caps from decades past clipped with worn brass pins. Some saluted each other in mock ceremony. One man played Folsom Prison Blues on a battered acoustic guitar while his wife passed out steaming cups of stew. Eli moved through the crowd like a quiet current, listening, nodding, letting others speak. Many offered thanks. One woman pressed a pie into his hands and whispered, "My dad was Army. He'd be proud." The warmth in the backyard had nothing to do with the fire pit. Pine Bluff was waking up, and it wasn't just to the smell of smoked meat. Toward mid-afternoon, Lisa gathered a small group near the back fence. "We've got enough signatures to call for a full re-election," she said. "We need 3 more to make it official." Marvin raised his phone, already composing a post. Your neighborhood, your rules. Sign the petition today. In the middle of the gathering, June clinked a fork against her mug and raised it high. To freedom, she called out, voice strong. To smoked meat, and to knowing your rights. Cheers erupted, loud, genuine, echoing past the pines. At the edge of the yard, a car idled. Cynthia Bellwood sat in the driver's seat, sunglasses hiding her expression. She rolled down the window just far enough to hear the laughter before she pulled away, the tires crunching over gravel like closing doors. As the sun dipped low, and shadows lengthened across the frostbitten lawn, Eli felt a tap on his shoulder. A neighbor leaned in, voice low. Cynthia's calling a special vote, he said. Just HOA board members. No residents. Cynthia thought she'd pulled a fast one, until a forgotten clause turned her crown to dust. The snow came early that afternoon, blanketing Pine Bluff in a hush that didn't reach the community hall. Inside, the heater buzzed unevenly, the air thick with tension and the scent of too sweet cocoa and sugar-dusted cookies someone had left by the coat rack. Folding chairs scraped over linoleum floors as neighbors shuffled in, faces drawn, eyes sharp. Cynthia stood at the front beneath the HOA seal, her gavel clutched in one hand like a relic of some fading dynasty. She wore a deep red blazer, lips painted to match, and a smile that trembled at the edges. Behind her, the HOA board members sat stiffly, glancing at one another with the uneasy energy of passengers realizing the drivers lost the map. I call this special session to order, Cynthia began, voice sharp. The agenda today concerns disruptive behavior, coordinated civil disobedience, and a motion to remove Mr. Eli Turner from community standing. There was a ripple in the crowd. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered, she's really going for it. Lisa Monroe stood near the center aisle, her arms folded, expression unreadable. She let Cynthia speak, allowed the accusations to hang in the air like smoke. Then, as if flipping a switch, she took a single step forward and unfolded a sheet of printed paper. The HOA charter, Lisa said, her voice even, requires a full community election for all board positions every 2 years. The last documented election was 3.5 years ago. Cynthia blinked. That's irrelevant. This is a special vote, board business only. Marvin raised a tablet. I accessed the county website, he said. No notice of election filings in that period. No candidate statements. No resident ballots. The board has been operating in violation of its own rules. Gasps rippled through the room. One of the board members, a gray-haired man in a navy cardigan, leaned toward Cynthia and whispered urgently. Her expression soured. Eli sat quietly in the second row, his presence understated but unmistakable. He wore his father's old flannel shirt, the sleeves rolled to the forearms, a faded button missing near the collar. His hands rested on his lap. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Others spoke for him. This isn't just about one man's truck, said a woman near the back wall. It's about respect. About process. About fairness. More nods. More murmurs. The crowd, once hesitant, was becoming something more. Cynthia banged the gavel. The board has the authority. No, Lisa interrupted, still calm. The board has rules. And you've broken them. There was a beat of silence so complete it seemed the heater paused to listen. June stood up, balancing a thermos in one hand and a slip of paper in the other. I move, she said clearly, that this board be dissolved, effective immediately, and that new elections be held next Sunday with full resident participation. For a moment, Cynthia froze. Her knuckles whitened on the gavel. The board behind her shifted in their chairs like nervous schoolchildren. No one spoke. Then someone said, seconded. The room swelled with voices, soft at first, then stronger. Yes. I agree. Absolutely. A unanimous chorus. Even the board members nodded, slowly, as if granting themselves permission to finally let go of something they hadn't wanted to hold. Cynthia's eyes flicked from face to face, seeking an ally and finding none. Her grip on the gavel loosened. It clattered to the table with a dull, final thud. She walked out without a word. In her wake, the room exhaled. Chairs creaked as neighbors turned to one another, not just to whisper, but to speak. Openly. Hopefully. A tray of cookies passed from row to row, small sugar stars dissolving on grateful tongues. Marvin showed a clip from his phone, Lisa quoting the bylaws with steady conviction. Someone laughed. For the first time in years, Pine Bluff was planning something together. On election morning, Pine Bluff was blanketed in snow, and Cynthia Bellwood was unraveling faster than the weather forecast predicted. The park looked like a scene from a postcard, thick snow layering every branch and bench, soft flurries swirling down over knit scarves and steaming thermoses. A tent had been pitched near the gazebo, canvas walls bulging gently in the wind, strings of small paper lanterns swaying beside hand-painted signs, HOA vote today, residents only. By 8 a.m., a line of neighbors stretched halfway around the square, boots crunching quietly, gloved hands tucked around coffee mugs or clutching ballots. Lisa and Ray passed out hand warmers from a big canvas sack, while June stood behind a folding table, counting off names with bright red mittens. Eli stood off to the side, his breath curling in front of him as he watched the scene unfold. He didn't need to direct anything anymore. The town had picked up the baton. Somewhere near the fire pit, a group of seniors hummed familiar carols, off-key but full-hearted. The notes rose into the cold like small defiant flags, announcing, "We are still here. We still care." Cynthia arrived just before 10, wearing a long fur-lined coat that trailed snow with every step. Her lipstick was darker than usual, and her smile tighter. She didn't wait in line. "This entire process is illegitimate," she barked. "This tent isn't sanctioned." That man, she pointed a trembling glove toward Marvin, who was live-streaming beside the donut table, has tampered with the setup. "No, ma'am," Marvin replied, not looking up from his phone. "We're streaming in real time. Want to wave to your followers?" A few people chuckled. Cynthia's cheeks flushed. "You're all going to regret this," she snapped. "You think a few snowflakes and a camera make a democracy?" Lisa stepped forward, holding up the HOA's printed charter. "Actually, Cynthia, it's the clause here, resident elections shall be held by open ballot, supervised by any non-board member." "Which we are. And you're not." It was quiet enough that the soft carol of "Let It Snow" floated across the tent walls like irony incarnate. Cynthia reached toward the ballot box. "Then I'm taking this. This whole thing is a sham." "No," Eli said, his first word that day, calm as a resting lake. "That's enough." But she already had her hands on the plastic container, lifting it from the table. Her boots slid on the icy mat and time seemed to slow. The box slipped. Her feet gave way. And then she was on the ground, half buried in snow, flailing, the box tipped beside her, ballots fluttering like startled birds. Gasps. Murmurs. Then silence. Neighbors began to step forward, Diane with a scarf, a young teen with a gloved hand reaching down. But Cynthia waved them off. "No," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Don't touch me. Don't pretend you care." She sat upright, snow clinging to her coat like crushed pearls, her lipstick smeared and eyes wild. "This community was mine," she screamed. "Mine." No one moved. No one spoke. A camera clicked. Even the snow seemed to pause. And then, June walked up behind Eli and leaned in, voice just above a whisper. "Now, we rebuild. Underscore 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 underscore. Cliffhanger, June whispers to Eli, "Now, we rebuild." Weeks later, a warm glow returned to Pine Bluff, not just from Christmas lights, but from the neighbors who now smiled and waved again. The first week of December brought a different kind of quiet to the valley, one that hummed with harmony instead of tension. Wreaths hung neatly on wooden porches, red ribbons fluttering above mailboxes. Lights strung across fences twinkled beneath the weight of soft snow. From Diane's diner came the scent of nutmeg and baked ham, with the occasional sound of Bing Crosby floating through the cold. Eli was in his yard, hammering a loose slat back into the fence he'd built 20 years ago. He paused to check the line, still straight, and nodded to himself before reaching into his coat pocket for a handful of nails. Across the street, June directed a group of volunteers stringing garland around the entrance of the community hall. She wore a knit hat pulled low and smiled at everyone, whether she knew them or not. Since the election, she'd stepped in as chair of the interim HOA board, her clipboard now more trusted than any seal. Lisa had returned to Oregon a few days earlier, but not before hugging Eli and saying, "You call me if these folks get rowdy again. I'll bring the whole convoy." Marvin, meanwhile, was filming neighbors as they waved from porches, holding pies or mugs of cocoa. His camera was quiet but steady, capturing the before and after of a town that had learned how to breathe again. He said the documentary would be called The Quiet Rebellion. Eli didn't argue. Cynthia's house stood silent on the corner, a for sale sign staked in the yard. No decorations, no movement. But inside the community center, her polished gavel now rested in a basket next to a tin of cookies and a handwritten note, "Holiday auction, all proceeds go to the library fund." At noon, Diane hosted a holiday harmony lunch at the diner. Tables were covered in red checkered cloths, vases filled with pine branches and cranberries. Eli slipped in quietly, not expecting a fuss, but found himself greeted with gentle pats on the back and warm smiles. "You kept us honest," someone said. "That's a rare thing these days." Eli nodded, murmured something about how it was a group effort, then let the moment pass. Later that afternoon, as the last of the daylight dimmed, a boy in a green puffer coat darted across the lawn and pointed to the line of parked SUVs. "Hey, Mr. Eli. Are those army trucks?" Eli chuckled softly, setting down his toolbox. "Long story, kid." Porch lights blinked on in unison a moment later. Marvin had written an app to synchronize them, called it Neighbor Glow, and now they glimmered across the street like shared heartbeat pulses. Red, gold, white. Steady, calm. Eli stepped back onto his porch with a mug of fresh coffee, the smell mingling with pine and faint music. He sat in his old rocker, letting it creak beneath him as he watched residents gather around the big evergreen near the cul-de-sac. Some were hanging ornaments, others laughing, sipping cider. A string of mismatched decorations wrapped the tree's base, each one donated from someone's attic or kitchen drawer. On the wall beside the door, the framed HOA letter still hung proudly. Next to it was a photo, Eli, June, Lisa, and Ray, standing outside the community hall on election day. No big grins, no victory poses. Just eyes that said, "We did what we had to do." In the distance, a moving truck pulled up beside the vacant house at the edge of the street. A woman in a red scarf stepped out, then disappeared behind the open door. Eli stood, brushed snow off his coat and stepped down from the porch. He sees a new neighbor moving in, and offers to help carry a box. As the last porch light flickered on and Pine Bluff settled into its gentle winter hush, it wasn't the snow or decorations that stood out, but the quiet ease of neighbors finally at peace. What began with one man's quiet resistance became a ripple of resolve, pulling back the curtain on control and reminding a town of its shared strength. When rules are used for good, communities thrive. When they're misused, they crumble. Perhaps you've known a place where voices went unheard, or kindness took a back seat to rules. Let this be a reminder, even the smallest porch can shine like a beacon when neighbors stand together.